Everyone, and welcome to a very special evening hosted by Betty Peoples-Wheeler and Vernita Bradford of the Healthy Road Lifestyle. To introduce the special guest of the evening, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, please welcome Dr. Hans Diehl.
Hello, it's so good to see all of you. Thank you, Chef AJ, for making room for us for the special Healthy Road program. It's my great privilege and honor to introduce to you a man that grew up on a farm, saw as his career goal to increase the consumption of animal protein, but over time, documented through revolutionary research, became one of the leading advocates of a plant-based whole food diet to arrest and reverse common chronic diseases. In the process, he also became a committed disciple of a diet-centered program of foods and vegetables, whole grains and legumes, foods as grown, while avoiding all animal products in his own lifestyle. He argues that casein, which is a protein in milk of mammals, is the most significant carcinogen, cancer-causing substance we consume in our diet. This man has written many best-selling books, such as the China Study, and more than 300 scientific published research papers. And we here at the Healthy Road program, together with the TV fan club of Chef AJ, we are all most fortunate to welcome our friend, Dr. T. Colin Campbell. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Diehl. You and I, and AJ, as a matter of fact, too, we go back quite a few years, altogether, maybe 30, 40, 50 years, something like that, added up together. In any case, I'm looking forward to this presentation. And let me make sure I got it up there. Just a second. Okay, can you see it now?
No, you had it up before, so just make sure it's on your desktop first, and then click share screen. Yeah, first pull it up on your desktop or your computer, and then click the share screen button second.
Oh, well, I didn't quite do that. I always usually do it the other way around.
Nope, first you got to see what you're talking about, and then click share screen, and then click the presentation.
Oh, just a second, I've got to go off. That's usually the opposite way I do it, but nevertheless.
Okay, you can try it your way and see if it works.
Okay, let me do the share screen first. Is that what you said?
Yeah, usually people pull it up on their desktop, then click share screen, highlight their presentation, and it should appear.
Do you see it?
Can't see it. Now we can see it, but we're seeing your whole desktop. So if there's a way to put it in, view mode. Maybe click play from start, perhaps. You got it.
Okay, good. I never can feel secure on these until I absolutely see all I want to see. Okay, start. So everyone can see my screen now, correct?
Yes, Dr. Campbell. I'm sorry, I muted myself for better sound, but everyone can see your screen now. Why nutrition is ignored.
Yes.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And welcome, everyone. I've been at this business a long time, as Dr. Diehl had indicated. This is my 67th year, I guess it is, from my graduate studies, and working on the same question all along, basically nutrition and health. And one of the things that has really become very apparent in recent years is that still today, after so long, nutrition is still not being recognized like it should. And so I want to make that the topic of my conversation. And I'll start off by first pointing out the kind of confusion that I see. And I would suggest that there's really almost nothing more confusing than just topic, it seems like to me. And here's a reason. Here's a reason. There's so many different kinds of diets, it seems to me. And this is what the public sees too. It's kind of hard to separate them out or know what the differences are, but there's a certain place for a lot of confusion. In my own nutrition research community, we do our part to cause confusion too. We tend to talk about individual nutrients, what each one does, and it's more than 30 or 40 nutrients. I mean, they're in the hundreds, thousands, or nutrient-like substances. We talk about how much is in the food exactly. Sometimes we talk about how much is being recommended, what are the targets of these nutrients, and sometimes we use nutrients as nutrient supplements, all acting alone. And I would argue that is not exactly the way it works. It obviously just is a source of confusion. Then the medical community who should be talking about this, there's not a medical school in the United States that teaches nutrition. So I speak on behalf of the public, really. With all that amount of material to think about and how you pair things up, it's no wonder that there's a lot of confusion. So let me then start off with what I believe is a fairly couple of simple dietary recommendations, and we'll talk about the evidence for this as we go along. But I say two things pretty much cover the world. Actually, we can talk about a million different details, but basically, I'd like to reduce it down to two recommendations. I said one is just consume plants, and Dr. Deal said it well. Consume the plants as grown. We can chop and cut them up and cook them and all that sort of thing. But the idea is to consume plants in the whole food form so that Mother Nature has a chance to decide what she wants when she puts things together. I don't consume animals. Let's not consume animals. And so I'm going to give that evidence fairly straight off. Also, as I said, we should be consuming plants in the whole food form. And here's the thing here that we should keep in mind. Because this message comes from two sources, both causing the same thing. Namely, as we increase animal food, supposedly because we really want it, as we consume animal food, we decrease plant food. This is with the assumption of zero-sum game as far as calories are concerned. So as animal food goes up, plant food goes down. And so when we see some of the evidence I'm going to show you here in human populations, it's a contribution of both, but they're both doing the same thing. Animal food increases disease at the same time that plant food decreases disease. So it's just one factor, really, a ratio of the two. Now, as Dr. Deal indicated, I came from a farm milking cows, grew up that way, went off to school eventually to Cornell University, and there I did my doctoral dissertation on a project to promote the consumption of more animal protein. That was what most everybody thought at that time and still today. Animal protein is a very precious nutrient, so we all think. That's where I started. But then after I finished my graduate work and was put in charge of a project in the Philippines, funded by the State Department, a project that was designed to create a better model for feeding malnourished children. And those of us in the professional field of nutrition in those days often believed that around the world in the poor countries, children, of course, there's too many children are in a difficult way. And the first thing that they need, so it was generally thought, is to make sure they just got food of any kind. So to get enough calcium, if you will. But then right behind that was the idea that the best kind of diet was making sure they got enough protein. However, in the Philippines, there with these children at the time, when we're supposed to be designing something to make sure they get protein, I saw something thanks to a college of mine, actually, and some other evidence I had, that there was some evidence that the children consuming the most protein, they got, of all things, liver cancer. Liver cancer is very serious, as you know. It's today, these days, is still considered the number 5 cause of death in the entire world. So it's kind of a big deal. But with the idea that these kids most likely to get that liver cancer, being the few in that area had animal protein, we have a problem on our hands. do we sort of organize this program around a consumption of animal protein or not? That was the genesis for my research, because I had to go about at that time doing some basic research to see if this was really true. It's hard to believe. Also, at the same time, there was this study in India that I became aware of in 1968, actually, was published. And this is an animal study, a rat study, where they organized a study to see if they could control liver cancer by increasing animal protein. That was the idea. And so in this right-hand column, I speak to it as hyperplastic nodules. That's liver cancer, if you will. The animal is given the highest level of protein, and that was pretty high at that time, 20% of total calories. And the one that had the lowest level was 5%. In any case, these animals that were prone to get liver cancer because of chemical carcinogen they had been exposed to, and they thought their thought was that if they could feed lower protein, the cancer might not occur. You can see here it's exactly the opposite. It's actually the opposite, which really fit into the suspicions I had at the time. The higher protein gave more liver cancer, if you will. So we had our work cut out for us to see whether or not that was really true. Increasing protein, increasing cancer, that was the story of the day. And so I had lots of graduate students who were working on their doctorate dissertations and master's degrees and so forth. And we worked on this for the first 12, 15 years to see what we could learn about it. How does this happen? And I had lots of different graphs. So I'm going to just show you one here to kind of put us in the right place. This is a graph showing the development of cancer, liver cancer, if you will, over the first 12 weeks after starting feeding the diet. And so feeding the diet with 20% protein, we got what the Indian workers had gotten. 20% protein was turning on that cancer rather well and very quickly. Animals fed 5%, the cancer did not grow. That was really quite spectacular. I mean, it started removing some doubt in my mind. Consuming more protein, and it's animal protein, by the way, casein, that's the main protein of cow's milk. And you can imagine how that set with me, milking cows. And here it is that we're finding the casein of cow's milk can turn on cancer. In any case, we did all kinds of studies looking at this up and down, one side and another. And here's one little observation that really kind of put things in place. Namely, when we started out feeding animal protein, the cancers were growing in the first 3 weeks, if you will, quite well. However, if we changed the diet from the 20% to 5%, the cancer stopped growing. It went down again and back on again and off again. This is really quite spectacular, because what this showed was, and this is, as they say, was published at first in early 80s at that time, what this showed was that it was possible, through nutritional means in this case, to turn cancer not only on, but turn it off. We reversing disease, reversing the cancer, experimentally, at least in this case. So a big idea came out of this that at those times, namely, instead of genes causing cancer and being responsible for the cancer, like everyone thought, and still most people today still think that idea, instead of genes being responsible for the cancer growth, it was nutrition. In this case, in the presence of a protein being adjusted back and forth. So at that time, I was really in a formal community research community. And so in that space of pharmacology, when we see something unusual like that, then the first thought that comes to mind is that maybe if we can understand how that really works, what is a so-called biochemical mechanism, then we might be able to develop a drug and block it and then keep on going along and eating the diet we want. So what I'm showing you here is a representation. It's a scheme, essentially, schematic of the cancer development that those of us in cancer research used at the time. Let me explain these two charts. They're both the same in the background. But in any case, cancer starts out in the beginning being initiated. That's when a mutation forms, and it kicks the cancer off, usually by a chemical of some sort. And then once it starts the cancer, then the cancer cells start to grow, double, and finally it reaches, that's called promotion. Finally, it reaches a point when, in the case of humans, we realize we have something here, the problem. We got diagnosed, and of course, by this time, the cancer might have metastasized to another tissue. At that point in time, it's rather dangerous. It's late in the stage, and the cancer is now developing, oftentimes, as I say, living in another tissue from where it started. Now, okay, that's the background. And in the first chart at the top here, I'm focusing on just this first stage. Asking the question, what's the mechanism for this effect, this spectacular effect? And so I'm going to just tell you here about the first stage. And usually each one of these, it took 3 or 4 years to do for a graduate student. We had to develop methodology. I mean, there's a lot of research here in this sort of thing. And so in the first stage here, here's what we learned. As we increase the protein in the diet and increase the rate of entry of this chemical carcinogen into the cell. Oh, so okay, that's it. If we just block that entry of the carcinogen into the cell, we could keep on protein. And that's what they're kind of thinking we were involved in, and everyone else for that matter. So it increases the rate of carcinogen into the cell. When these carcinogens, chemicals, of course, when these chemicals are in the cell, they are metabolized by an enzyme, either to dispose of them, detoxify them, we say, or a little bit can spill out and go, and very active product can bind to DNA, which is the stuff of genes, the stuff that gets mutated. It can bind to that and create some mischief and start the cancer. And so at the same time, when all these things are going on, we actually had 4 different ways of looking at how this works. And every time we looked for a mechanism, we found one. And every time the mechanism would be increased to cause more cancer when the animal protein was increased. However, in this first stage, let me back up just for a second. So we get the binding, we get the mutation forming at that point in time, and then when the cell divides, all the new cells are daughter cells. Now they're all cancerous, if you will. But we have a mechanism normally in our bodies that still works really quite well. It's called DNA repair. So by the chemical coming in and binding to the DNA, you start things off, we got a mechanism that reverses it. What did the animal protein do? This is one case where it decreases. So we had got one good mechanism to protect us against the cancer, and animal protein was actually depressing that. So let me show you. And then we went to the second stage. We looked at some more. I don't want to go into the details here, but simply to point out that after some years, 12 to 15 years or so, working at this research, we found 8 mechanisms that the animal protein increased. Okay, in every case, an increase meant that cancer was turned on. Then there are 2 mechanisms that were decreased. One up here at the top, one at the bottom. But in any case, 2 mechanisms decreased. Lo and behold, those decreases, that was a problem, because they should obviously be doing their work and keeping cancer at arm's length, if you will. So he found, after a period of time, 10 mechanisms, 8 increased, 2 decreased, but lo and behold, all 10 worked together in unison. To me, I have to tell you, that was one of the most exciting discoveries that I ever ran across, because what this said was that there isn't just one mechanism that causes this cancer, for example. There's a whole bunch. And in this case, they all work in unison together. I mean, just imagine who's in control here. I mean, we tend to think in medicine and in this kind of area, we tend to look for the mechanism so we can make a drug. Well, after doing this for some time, I finally got to the point, there is no such thing as the mechanism. They're all doing it. And I'm sure if we had a look, we could have found another 100 or 200 or 500. It was enough to really convince me that when the animal protein is increased, It really just changes everything, always in the direction of causing more cancer. Now, but keep in mind, most of the carcinogen that comes in the cell is disposed of and detoxified, as we say. But though that is activated, we get the cancer. At this point, I don't know what the mechanism is. So there's no room here for making a decision about looking for a drug to block it. All working together. And there's another point to be made here. This is also true of other nutrients, if I can jump ahead. This business of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, whatever, being caused by something like a nutrient, it turns out it's not just one nutrient or one mechanism. It all works together. It raises a question: who's the master here? What kind of mechanism do we have to control all of this to make it work at the same time? We have a word for that in science. It was called biological plausibility. So what this says is that turning on cancer by animal protein, it can be explained. It's biologically plausible, but not just one mechanism that we would have allowed, for example, making a drug, I guess you could say. Instead, all of them are turned on at the same time. Now, casein was the protein, as I said, that we used to cause this problem. Eventually, we did some studies to look at some plant proteins. They didn't do that. They had the opposite effect, even when it fed at the high level. And this was another spectacular idea. Animal protein it's all about animal protein turning on the cancer at really quite low levels, quite frankly. Eventually, that was the case. And the plant proteins did not do that. So that raised a question for me at the time. Well, if animal protein has that property, really kind of striking, what about, let's say, what might it be doing, let's say, to other diseases? And then I spent the rest of my career really focused on that question too. And it turned out, just to jump ahead, animal protein is a problem for virtually all diseases, so-called chronic degenerative diseases. And the plant proteins, in turn, prevent. Now, with that in mind, I think we can safely say animal protein causes cancer, and I should say it applies to other cancers. There's no mistake about it, just on the basis of looking at the biochemistry in the cell. Eventually, I had a chance, and this wasn't too many years ago, actually, something like 10, 15 years ago, I decided to go back into the literature and see, among other researchers, if they had any evidence that animal protein had that relationship with cancer. And so I found some studies and a number of different, I knew some of the researchers myself. It goes back to 1959, between 1959 and the 1980s, actually. And let me show you here what I found. This is a chart of the relationship between animal protein consumption on the x-axis at the bottom here, the relationship between animal protein consumption and, in this case, kidney cancer. Okay, and this kidney cancer incidence, if you will. And these are a bunch of different countries. So what I'm going to show you here is some more slides like this, but it's actually comparing the amount of cancer in all these different countries as a function of animal protein consumption. So you can see here, as we increase, in this case, as animal protein consumption increased in these various countries, where was the U.S.? The U.S. is somewhere up near the top here. Here's the U.S. right there. As animal protein consumption is on average increased, we get more kidney cancer. And now we've got quite a lot of data on this particular point. Sure enough, we can make that point quite clear. I drew the line through these and I just did a regression line for that. The authors did not do that. They just put that up. But I drew the regression line in a way in which, the points are equal number of points on either side. And what you can see here is that there's almost like a straight line relationship. And the cancers start increasing shortly, right after you consume just even a tiny bit of animal protein. This is a probability, of course. That line could be going right through there. But anyhow, that's what it looked like. So then I found another one. Here is heart disease as a function of animal protein. As animal protein is increased, and this researcher actually gathered a bunch of countries, got data on them, made this chart. And this is animal protein consumption versus heart disease. once again, as animal proteins increase, look at this. Really quite amazing. The question on heart disease is pretty remarkable. We've often thought it was due to fat or saturated fat in particular. That's not really true. We get heart disease from consuming animal protein, make no mistake about it. And that's been known actually for a long, long time, but no one really much wanted to talk about it much. They said it's fat, which is not correct. Adjusting fat up and down doesn't make a lot of difference. But in a practical sense, when we consume animal foods to get that good animal protein, if you will, we're consuming more fat, so we see fat have the same relationship. But it's really animal proteins are causing heart disease in this case. That was a study done in 1959, actually. Here's one here on prostate cancer. But this time, everybody in science, most even today, these days, they think of diet causing, let's say, if a diet is related to a disease, they tend to think they look for one mechanism. They look for one nutrient, if you will, or one kind of food. In this case, this was the 1980s, and this gentleman here got a bunch of data together from different countries and compared prostate cancer mortality in this case versus non-fat milk. Now stop and think about it. Non-fat milk obviously has no fat, skim milk, if you will, and there's no sugar really. And so of the three major calorie sources, this really turns out to be protein. So this is, instead of calling it non-fat milk, which gets people excited and confused and so forth and so on, this is really animal protein. And once again, we see the same relationship as renal cancer, heart disease, and prostate cancer. Pretty remarkable. Every time we see the same plot. Here's one by a friend of mine from Canada, and Dr. Deal, you'll know him as Ken Carroll. I think you would call him some years ago.
Yeah.
But Dr. Carroll actually had a bunch of countries too at the same time, and he was interested in seeing how that related to breast cancer. And so what he did in those days, thinking that saturated fat was the cause of cancer, he actually looked at the relationship between saturated fat and breast cancer, and once again, same relationship. I asked Ken, his friend of mine at the time, I was asked to give some testimony at the National Academy Committee, and he was on that committee at the time, and I asked his permission. I said, Ken, I'd like to show you something here. It's not really saturated fat, it's animal protein. The correlation between saturated fat and animal protein. I say that because I just want to, don't be taking the liberty of saying something that he didn't agree with in the beginning. So he agreed completely when I pointed out what was involved here. So once again, saturated fat or animal protein, once again, then breast cancer goes up. So here's 4 cases already of different cancers, and 3 different cancers and heart disease. Animal protein associated with increases in these diseases. Here's another one. In this case, here's heart disease rate on the x-axis on the bottom, just flipped a bit. And it's compared with the consumption of cholesterol. Now, a lot of us think that cholesterol causes heart disease. No, that's a mistaken story, and take too long here to explain why that got into the weeds. But in any case, what we see here is that as cholesterol intake goes up, and that's the same as, that's exactly correlated with animal protein. As that animal protein is increased, if you will, here's heart disease mortality increasing. This has been shown in other studies like this too. Here's one for colon cancer. This is meat. Well, obviously meat is animal protein. So as meat consumption increased, colon cancer is increased. In this case, it's incidence of colon cancer. Each one of these papers, mind you, was done by a different research group, probably not known each other, and all showing the same thing. Here's one for urine cancer. In this case, they were measuring total fat. That's the way we did research in those days, and still most people still try to do it. We try to find out what's in the food that might be related to heart disease or cancer and that sort of thing. We look for one thing. That's really a mistake, because it turns out that we see these relationships, and in this case, every single one is animal protein. Notice one thing about these lines. As these lines go down, straight down, it tells us, theoretically at least, that as soon as we start consuming animal food, supposedly maybe to get the cholesterol, certainly the animal protein, as soon as we start consuming that, the risk of these diseases starts to increase. Small at first, but eventually then it becomes very high. This corresponds, of course, to the rates of disease we see in total human studies. So I've shown here, it says animal protein, I call them surrogates, things like cholesterol and meat and total fat. I mean, these are all animal protein things. This has never really been published before. People have tended to think, skim milk causes prostate cancer or cholesterol causes heart, and so forth and so on. In reality, they all have one thing in common. One thing in common, it's animal protein. And I feel very comfortable saying that, not only because of the way these charts arrange themselves, but also because of the ability of animal protein to create cancer through the mechanisms that it uses. Now, here's, just to keep us on track, here's one by the late Ken Carroll, who did the other one on saturated fat. He looked at unsaturated fat, in this case, or plant protein. You can see in this chart here of breast cancer, there's no relationship between plant protein and breast cancer. All these others are between animal food, or animal protein, if you will, and these various cancers. So now let me turn your attention to something fairly recent. I've already gotten into this business for a long time. I've explored with many students I had, how this works, and I can assure you that all these relationships are really quite striking, and we can explain them from a biological perspective. There's no one will ever come along and show something different. I mean, this is a final sort of statement in a sense, because no one can go along and find another bunch of countries and show the opposite. As animal proteins increase, the cancers will go down and heart disease will go down. It won't happen. So I feel very comfortable that these observations here are telling us one story, very, very powerful. Animal protein causes cancer, causes heart disease, causes chronic kidney disease, and a bunch of other so-called chronic degenerative diseases. So eating animal food is not in our best interest, let me tell you. Here's one on a virus. No one is really told about this, but when the coronavirus started in 2020, I had a lot of evidence from a study we had done in China years before. In fact, it had been done twice, and this is the second round of it. In that study, we were looking at the relationship between nutrition and various kinds of diseases, and it was a huge study. The New York Times called it the Grand Prix of all studies, and we had access to a huge amount of information. And so, in this case, there's almost 9,000 adults. What we did there in this study was to see if we could determine the causes of hepatitis B virus, which causes liver cancer, as I mentioned before. This is a very sketchy, brief summary of that. Almost 9,000 adults. We measured who amongst these people had, let's say, the active virus, who was forming antibodies, and what were their nutrition conditions that were related to this disease. Now, here's a little schematic just to explain to you how a virus works. This applies to coronavirus as well. The virus is out there in the environment somehow, water, air, whatever. It infects us. And then when the virus infects us, that's not a big problem when it first infects. If in fact our immune system can come into play and take care of it. So it affects us. The virus remains active for a little while. We were able to measure this virus in all these people. There's an active virus, right, the antigen, and we could look to see what would happen. Now, this virus has caused liver cancer. And I tell you, this is a really big cancer in China that causes this cancer. So we wanted to see what amongst our collection of data we had, as I say, a huge volume of information on nutritional characteristics. Here's the one that really took home the message. Animal protein consumed even in small amounts, even only 10% on average, what we do in the West. Those people consuming animal protein, even small amounts, they were the ones that converted the antigen, the active virus, to liver cancer and died. In contrast, those consuming more plant food, as you can see here, they were the people who did not get liver cancer and they formed antibodies to deactivate the virus. And they also caused the production of so-called T cells. Now, I put that in there because we did this now almost 40 years ago in China. The virus, when the pandemic came out, a lot of issues arose and still is rising now, spending millions of dollars trying to figure out how we can activate the T cells, which comes from the immune system. It's a very active area of research. What we found in an animal study, just cut out the animal protein and the T cells will come to life and take care of things. So it's just one of those mechanisms we did from before. So here you have it. Animal food causing cancer, plant food not. Just that simple. This is based on a total of 11 highly significant risk factor correlations, all converging to the same conclusion. Very, very powerful data. This was published in 1980. That were started in two studies, one in 1983, one in 1989. The one I'm talking about now is one we were just analyzing here at the beginning of the pandemic. But nonetheless, 11 risk factor correlations, all highly significant. Once again, I mean, this is sort of irrefutable evidence. I had some other evidence that on viruses, consumer and plant-based diet would protect us against the viruses. However, I submitted this for publication. And I saw something the first time in my life I saw this. This is in 2021, a year after the pandemic was around. And so I summarized these data, sent them in for publication in one of the two of the best known journals in the world. I published there before, no problem. And in science, we're always entitled to have it reviewed. And then it's either rejected or accepted, if you will. In this particular case, in both cases, the organizers, the business people, if you will, the ones running the show, the journals, they wouldn't even send it out for review. I have to tell you, this is a huge deal, because I was merely saying, in this case here, we see these results striking, really striking. I was merely suggesting, with the kind of evidence that we had on this virus, it might work for coronavirus. Why not take the opportunity to begin to tell people change their diet? I'm really convinced it would have made a big difference, but they had other ideas. They thought vaccines were the way to go, which wasn't. So I did eventually publish that, but it was in a less noticed journal, and so it did get published. But it said something that's really quite remarkable, namely the kind of diet that prevents and reverses heart disease, as my good friends Dr. Ornish and Dr. Esselstyn and others have shown. It reverses cancer, at least experimentally, and that sort of thing. The kind of diet that does that, I call a whole food plant-based diet. It works on viruses too. Make no mistake about it. Now, we tend to consume animal protein or animal food back to an old idea that was published in 1924, now 100 years ago about, an old idea that animal protein somehow is higher quality, plant protein is low quality. You've probably heard this before. It's not true. It's not true. They call it high quality because it refers to the amount of protein being consumed that's retained in the body. Well, okay, animal foods are all high quality. More is retained in the body because animal proteins are sort of like our protein. We're animals too. And so it's quite natural to assume more is going to be retained. And so when we retain more in the body from the animal sources, it increases body weight gain, good for animal production, but it also turns on cholesterol synthesis and a whole lot of other things. It turns on cancer. So it really is, we've been swimming in the wrong pond for a long time. And so-called high-quality animal protein that's promoted and sold and creates a huge industry and all that sort of stuff, without a doubt, it also increases some mechanisms that turn on these diseases. These are our own sort of discoveries that no one wants to, they're published, but they're not making any news, and that's another story. Animal protein increases growth hormone, which increases cancer and a lot of other difficulties. It increases blood estrogen. That's a hormone for women. That increases heart disease risk. It increases free radicals, which is another very reactive product that comes from consuming more animal protein, and on and on. In other words, animal protein increases cancer by a bunch of different mechanisms. It increases heart disease too. And this is something that goes back to the early 1900s when it was first discovered, but then they wanted to deny it. It's published and quite remarkable. So animal protein increases serum cholesterol, which in turn increases heart disease, and it increases diabetes and a bunch of other diseases, arthritic diseases, chronic kidney diseases, autoimmune diseases. Animal protein is a problem. It's really a problem. And that's why I had to tell you I was from the farm at the beginning. And by graduate school, I was doing the doctorate dissertation because everybody thought that too. That, we had to figure out how people could get more access to more animal food, when in fact, as I eventually learned, is exactly the opposite. Okay, now, in the time I have left, I want to share with you a little bit of evidence on another idea. So, in short, let me just say this. I just showed you a tiny bit of data we have, but very powerful data. To say we have no business eating animal food, period, end of story. And no one will ever show anything to the reverse, except little tweaks here and there, but doesn't make any difference. I want to show you the second part of that message that I talked about, eating whole food. And this, I'm starting out here with a publication in 1981 by some authors in Chicago at the time. And at that time, the health community was working hard, as they should have been, to decrease smoking. And so there was a big story about that. I'm sure many of you know that story. Eventually, smoking did come down quite a bit. But they really got onto it because of this study here in part. Actually a brilliant study. Let me show you what the study is. You can see we call it three-dimensional. Okay, so along this axis here, they had smokers. They were looking at smokers. They grouped them into non-smokers, first entry here, and then those who smoked less than 30 years, and then those smoking more than 30 years, okay? What they found was the people who had been smoking more than 30 years, they were the ones that got the lung cancer. Who were less than 30 years, they didn't get too much, but they did something else. And here's the point of my telling you this. It's because in this group of heavy smokers, you'll see there's a dose response. Among that group, all of them smoking more than 30. But look, here's really high and gradually goes down. What they found was they measured something else in this study. And they measured the consumption of carotene. Now, you may know that carotene is pre-vitamin A. Carotene is only in plants. So, but they were looking at just one chemical at the time, one nutrient. And this is really a reflection of plant food. And so what they found is, in this group of heavy smokers, you can see when you break them off into 4 different groups, the ones consuming the lowest level of carotene, they had the highest amount of lung cancer. And look at that beautiful dose-response relationship. Those consuming the most beta-carotene, more plants, if you will, it prevented these smokers from getting lung cancer, almost down to 0, even in spite of the fact they're heavy smokers. Now, of course, because it suggests that if you eat plants, you can even smoke and maybe get away with it. I am not about to promote that idea whatsoever. I'm merely mentioning that this kind of data really at that time for me was remarkable, because I was at the time turning cancer on and off and showing how nutrients can affect the cancer process. And so this fit right into what I was learning myself in the lab. Increased plant protein or plant food consumption, he sort of knocks out lung cancer, to say nothing of all the other kinds of diseases we get. That's really quite remarkable. Anyhow, some researchers at that time, they got wind of this, and they got quite excited about, say, wait, you know what? If we put some beta-carotene into some pills, then we could give it to smokers and get lung cancer. So that study was organized, believe it or not. Okay, here's the summary of it. We'll do it. This is in the 1980s at the time. Very exciting. Everybody's excited about this. And so here's a summary of what they learned after. It was meant to be for 8 years, because they knew they had to do the study for 8 years, because it had to get that amount of time to see differences. But they saw something that was unexpected. Look at this. 29,000 male smokers, they followed them. Okay. Half of them got the beta carotene, and the other did not. You see how it worked. They had to stop the study at 5 years because it got a result. Really pretty remarkable. First off, the people consuming beta carotene in form of food, their lung cancer rate was decreased. Once again, this is a new study. That's a very short period of time. And it was statistically significant. More food consumption in the form of beta carotene, it came down. But look at this. Those who got the supplement, the beta carotene, it increased lung cancer, and it was statistically significant. This was a remarkable study. And at that time, what it says that nutrients, when they're in food, they work. Okay? When they're in food, they're working as they should, good nutrients. But when you take them out of the food and put in a pill, like a supplement, they can have the opposite effect. I was very central to this at that time because there was a group of entrepreneurs who were wanting to make a supplement industry. This is the middle 80s, by the way. And so they were making some claims about a study that I had co-authored with some others to the National Academy that weren't right. They took out a full page ad of Time magazine and Newsweek and U.S. News Report. And they were working hard to take advantage of what they thought they were seeing in our study. And they started wanting to put these nutrients in some supplements. And they were making claims that weren't right. They were misquoting our work. And so the National Academy of Science took them to court, in Federal Trade Commission court. And there was a trial that lasted for 3 years and challenging the industry for making these wild claims. And they asked me, I was a representative, I was in the docket for 3 years, off and on, being the person who was judging, their claims, if you will. And so I tell you that because I had an opportunity to see not only this question concerning nutrient supplements, in this case, but also I've watched closely the studies done on nutrient supplements, supposedly for good effect. And I can tell you that the nutrient supplements really cannot be counted on to work, period. They can have the opposite effect. Most of the time, they have no effect. But nonetheless, in spite of that, the industry kind of got laws changed and redesigned in the government and so forth, the Food and Drug Administration. They got redesigned, so it allowed them to start forming a nutrient supplement industry. And the nutrient supplement industry formed in the early 1990s, at least in a big time way. And now today, as you know, it's something like a $70 billion industry. But the nutrient supplements is not the same nutrition. It's not even nutrition, I call it. It's not the same nutrition as you can find in food. The message here is get your nutrients from food. Make sure it's animal food. I mean, a plant food, that. That's why I say whole food, by the way, because I'm the one who came up with the word plant-based. That was in the late 80s when I was asked by some colleagues to try to explain how nutrition might work at a meeting. And anyhow, I didn't want to use the word vegetarian. I don't particularly like that word because it's not, the science behind it is not spoken in the right way. So I use the word plant-based, and a little later, because of being in this trial situation with the government, it was clear to me that it's all about whole foods. And so I decided to stick the word whole on it and came up with that term whole food, plant-based. So it was back in the 80s, and I just, because I wanted to get away from the, it's a good argument to, live by your ethics. There's no question about that. And do it for animals' sake, I'm all for that. But on the one hand, but on the other hand, it does not speak to, it hasn't spoken to the question concerning human health. So I came up with the word holism. I used a W in front of it. Previously I've been spoken of just for the H alone. I wanted to emphasize that idea of whole. And this other, using single nutrients, that's what the whole drug industry is about, by the way. The drug industry, for the most part, is about using single drugs, single chemicals to do this, that, something else. It's not of the whole food to do it right. And we tend to work in my community with single nutrients. So I find a huge difference between trying to rely on single nutrients, they're doing their thing, good or bad, and then holism. So now let me just give you just a little more insight on this here, because this idea of whole food, I just find so remarkable. Way back when I was early in my career, I was teaching biochemistry, and we are dealing with a simplified version of this thing called the Krebs cycle, like across the top, where basically the sun shines on plants and captures the energy and puts it in the form of chemical bonds and makes little chemicals, if you will. We consume the chemicals, and then they kind of strip off some energy as we metabolize it. And that's where we get our energy from. We get it from the sun into the plants, we eat the plants, and there you have it. Anyhow, let me show you this here. This is when I was teaching, it was even simpler than this because not all these intermediates had yet been found. Most of them, not all. So the sun comes in, they capture the energy, then we go about eating that and then stripping off the energy and doing things with it. Let me show you something. Within about 10 years when I was teaching, it had become this. I mean, there was an industry and other industries, but one in particular, Sigma Chemical, that kept adding, all these new discoveries about this reaction, that reaction. So it went. And so about 10 years after that, maybe 15, I guess, this is what you see here. It was getting so complicated. There were so many reactions. I can tell you right now, it's 100 times the size. This is our metabolism in every cell of the body. We get chemicals into our cells. Those chemicals are broken down and they do their thing. We get energy out of a lot of them. I call it a metabolic maze. But let me tell you something. This is really striking. I finally realized. The drug protocol, and as I say, I was in the pharmaceutical industry the first 15 years or so of my career, and so I had a good feeling for what goes on in the drug industry and how they think. The people who want to make drugs, they want to find out what's the mechanism for some problem they see. That's why I told you about mechanism. I was doing that too, looking for a mechanism. But finally came to the conclusion there is no such thing as one mechanism. We can't rely on that. That's crazy. Because if we make these chemicals, call them drugs, if you will, you come in and hit one of these reactions, and I'm just showing you one here just for sake of argument, one reaction, then we're going to block the diseases that come out of that. It's really quite foolish, really, really foolish. And we should get multiple side effects. The third or fourth leading cause of death in this country, the side effects of drugs, by the way. Those are official. The CDC doesn't want to mention that, but it's published. The food protocol, here's the difference. Drug protocol is one thing. We're going to solve our health problems by creating one chemical and then deal with it this way, which is, I have to say, with multiple side effects, and a lot of times there was no benefit, no efficacy. We might see some effects sometimes in a short run, but for the long run, it doesn't substitute at all with food. In contrast, food's got all these wonderful foods in plant form, right? And they operate in this mysterious way. Millions and trillions of cells, with millions of different kind of chemicals, all being consumed and then being handled in our body in this remarkable way, in a very uniform way. We will never do that in science. It's something that it just happens. I just can't. It's sometimes I compare it to something like the Renaissance art, where you get an expression of something without focusing on individual strokes of the pen. In any case, this is what my take on this really complicated metabolism is all about. Now, let me break it down here and tell you how others see it. This was published in the late 1980s. Heart disease was a problem, okay? And also it was noticed that high cholesterol in the blood was associated with heart disease. And they thought cholesterol was causing it when, as I said, that's not really the case. But anyhow, high cholesterol goes up with heart disease for other reasons, not because it causes heart disease, but anyhow, they got the idea that this cholesterol is causing heart disease. We got to figure out somehow, if we can find out how that's made, then we can maybe get a chemical and block it. So they went to the chart here, as you can see here, and learned how cholesterol is made. We make cholesterol. It's a good thing in our bodies. And so it goes through a series of steps, starting up this compound called acetyl-CoA. it makes eventually makes cholesterol. So the idea was, let's find some chemical to block this, and we'll control heart disease. So they looked and they found one. Wow, they got one eventually. This is the statins. This is the statins that but generally don't work. This is, again, a multi-billion dollar industry. That's how we're going to control heart disease. It is really, I have to say, it's nonsense. Yeah, the best evidence that we have is it might decrease risk of heart disease or death from heart disease by 9%. A lot of studies show nothing. And on top of it, statins have a lot of side effects. Here's a comparison. A guy showed me that he had done. His name was Tanner. I didn't know him very well, but he sent me this chart that he had put together some data on the comparison of heart disease interventions on heart disease mortality. And what he showed here is that people with heart disease not treated, their rate of heart disease is set at 100%, if you will. Those who do stents as a means of controlling heart disease, it decreased heart disease by a tiny little bit. Statins, as I say, that's the best, that's the best figure I could come up with. It decreased heart disease by 9%, with side effects, by the way. Vegetarians, they're down a little bit. They do a little bit better. They get it down. But you know, the ones that don't get do the best of all is whole food, plant-based diets. This is why Dr. Ornish, especially Dr. Esselstyn, Ornish still use some dairy a bit, but nonetheless, he got some really good evidence. And Esselstyn got these remarkable results. You know, you switch to a whole food plant-based diet, not only prevent disease, it actually reversed it. And then we spend all this kind of money to do something different. When the one thing is staring us right in the face, we don't take advantage of it. So anyhow, I spent my career doing this kind of stuff and getting into a lot of trouble and having situations where my own society, a petition had me thrown out of my society, and I had to go to a hearing in Washington, and on and on like that. People try to get me thrown out of university. And I say that because the one thing I was able to withstand this nonsense is because I had academic freedom. Academic freedom. It was so precious. I was granted that early in my career, in the early 30s. And so I was able to speak what I wanted to, and just let the rest, and speak out loud, which I was able to do. And however they tried, they didn't get it. And I was complaining, during this time. And my wife finally said, she said, why don't you write a book for the public and tell them about this? So I wrote the China study. I didn't think it would go anyplace. And finally, this is the second. That was 2005. In 2006, I put a second one out. This is the second edition. The book has been now translated to over 50 foreign languages, and the number of copies sold it's got to be close to 4 million right now. This is a figure 4 or 5 years ago. The book has really settled well, and I was surprised. I didn't think it would go anyplace, but it really has demonstrated for a lot of folks, what they can gain, what they can do. What Dr. Deal has talked about, by the way, and Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Ornish, Dr. McDougall, there's quite a lot of people now in professional arena sort of seeing things from various points of view. And the book that I get most excited about is Whole, because there I'm trying to explain the basic biochemistry and other epidemiological related stuff to talk about the fact that the way we get healthy is allow whole food, as in nature, to do its job. We don't need to come in and try to suppress that idea, talking about eating the wrong food, or even sort of forgetting about the fact that the whole food work all at one time can do the work. Instead, we tend to let ourselves eat the wrong food, and we let ourselves get disease, all being sort of, we can assume somehow when we get the disease, oh, well, that's okay, we'll have some drugs for it. This has got to be one of the worst operations that I can imagine. It's time that everybody get to know this, so we get things turned around. finally published another book, Future Nutrition, using examples of the past that were wrong, describing it that way. This book has done really well. We haven't got the publicity for it. I wrote this with my grandson, actually, a really good writer, Nelson Diesler, graduate of University of North Carolina. So we did that. That came out in 2020. Now I want to leave you this. This is really, really significant. We've got all kinds of problems. We all know that. We've got environmental, I just divide them up this way: environmental problems and human health problems. Okay, we can break it down into, here's some ideas: climate, warming, deep water loss, all that kind of stuff. Over here in human health, we got huge healthcare costs. We're doing it the wrong way right now. We've got our dependency on prescription drugs. We're the #1 country in the world doing that. We got drug side effects, thirdly, cause of death. I mean, something's wrong here. And so we got all these problems. You could add some more yourself to these. I just wanted to make the point here. When we do that, when we talk about all these as if they're separate problems, we then tend to assume they have independent causes. Each of them has a cause. So we spend a lot of money and get active and excited about that. That's fair enough to work, specialize in that kind of thing. But what about the idea? Oh, here, I just put some charts up here. Prescription drug dependency is related to high healthcare costs and side effects and shorter life, by the way. But in any case, these things interplay with each other. We tend to assume they have independent causes. We're wasting our time always looking for a drug and finding some way to do that. I suggest we have one broad spectrum cause. One broad spectrum cause. And I can make a case, and now some people are starting to begin to make the case, that all of these would be minimized if we ate the right diet. It's that simple. We tend to eat an animal protein enriched diet to cause these problems. Animal protein itself has that problem, but as I said before, remember, when we eat animal food, just to get that good animal protein because it's high quality, that's nonsense. We eat all the animal food and we decrease our consumption of plant food where the real problem begins to occur. So we got to combine those things. Don't eat animals. There's no point of eating animals. And why don't we just get the right kind of plant food? You can have all the variety you want. And there's no special formula, just whatever you like. I finally ended up on this note here of having a new definition of nutrition. It really involves not one nutrient here and one nutrient there and so forth and so on. It's multiple nutrients. Each nutrient having multiple mechanisms. That's the story there I could have told and spent a couple of hours on that one. Each nutrient has multiple mechanisms oftentimes. They create, the good diet actually prevents some multiple diseases, causes multiple health improvements. That's when I use this word here, whole food, plant-based. It's whole, as I said, plant-based. I don't see how we can go wrong. And it's such a simple message. We don't need to get caught up in all this funny details that we get involved in. We can forget today. Just tell people, just a simple message. Just a simple message. Eat plant foods, in a wholesome form. We can cook them, we can cut them up and dice them, we can mix and match whatever way we want. We'll get most of the benefits of nutrition just by doing that.
Lily?
Here's reductionist medicine. Okay, I'm just about right done here. This is what's wrong with medicine. I've spoken in medical schools in all but 6 states in this country. And I know the systems fairly well, I think. A lot of good people, great people working in that discipline, but not a medical school in the country teaches nutrition. They live on this concept of look at one thing at a time, usually drug. And in some cases, they can create some good effects, at least for the short term. But if we're going to do that, I don't want to distract from what is being done. I just simply want to say when that becomes the only way and not teaching nutrition, that's where the problem occurs. Okay, just said enough about that. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go over too far, Hans, but there's my story.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. I'm going to stop your screen share now, if that's okay.
Okay, I will do that.
Dr. Deal, did you want to say anything? I had to mute you because
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, Dr.
This was absolutely fascinating. I mean, putting it all together, maybe some of you may found this too technical in some ways, but I mean, you saw the chart after chart after chart after chart, and you saw the regression lines every time. The more of animal protein, the more disease. To lighten it up maybe a little bit, I was wondering if Dr. Campbell would be open to sharing how he became a doctor to his wife and turned a special disease around.
Yes, thank you, Hans, for that reminder. I'm glad you raised that question. Yeah, we, as I say, we were the typical American diet, first part of our married life, and gradually started to change. And by what was it, the late 80s, more or less, we're almost there. She was diagnosed with melanoma, really advanced melanoma, mind you. I mean, that's pretty serious cancer.
Now, excuse me, help us understand what melanoma is for everybody's benefit.
Yeah, melanoma is skin cancer. It's a really dangerous kind of skin cancer, and it's deadly. It's a very lethal cancer. And so, of all things, she got diagnosed with that. So I went in to look at under the microscope too, to look at the cells, and I saw something that was relating to somebody in England, namely that what they were looking at was an early state, was not quite advanced, but they called it advanced, and that's the way it is. And the doctor wanted to give her drugs. So, and very serious drugs, and migrated to her lymph gland. So we went in, I was with her that day. He didn't know who I was. But anyhow, he was setting it up, telling her to take this chemotherapy regimen, and also to do an operation to remove those lymph glands at that point. And she knew enough what I was thinking, and she was thinking too. She said, "No, I'm not doing it." He got really quite angry and just told her, "Ma'am," says, "if you don't do this, in 6 months' time, I'll be able to do nothing for you." But that's what I believed, and she did it. That was her decision, obviously. That was 18 years ago, and no trace of it since. She's now 83. Earlier, her mother had passed away at the age of 51, of colon cancer. And on the wrong diet in those years, of course. And it was sort of the same thing. Eating it wrong, she had that problem. And Karen had symptoms of early colon cancer early on. She had 2 brothers who died in their 50s of colon cancer. So it's, if you will, it's kind of there. It's in her family. She didn't do anything, and she has no trace of that either. So there you have it. My side of the family, my dad, who I must tell you, I have to say this because I owe so much to him. He only had 2 years of formal education. And he was so anxious for me to get an education that he had set up. So I drove just 102 miles a day to go to high school, junior high and senior high. And then eventually go to school. And I was the first one to go to college. So I want to say that because he meant so much to me. And it was his idea that he said, just remember, son, when you go out there, it says, tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That was a driving force for me, but I have to tell that. So in both our family, cancer in my wife's family, heart disease on my side, he died early. He got a heart attack at 63, passed away at 70. His brother had a fatal attack at 58. Their father, my grandfather, 73. So between Karen and I, we did our thing, and I think we saw the benefits. And I forget whether I said this before, but I think I did say this when I was running some difficulty and people were getting angry with me, taking a stand from here and there. She finally told me, I apologize if I'm saying this the second time, but she said, why don't you write a book for the public? And that was the basis for the China study. So I did. I didn't expect to get any place with it, but as I said, it's really going well. So she and I, this is our 61st year of marriage, and we don't use drugs, and we just live by this. So this is personal for me. I tell you, big time to eat this way.
Thank you for sharing that and this beautiful outcome. We just love Karen, and we love you. We do.
Dr. Campbell, would you care to answer a few questions from the viewers?
If I can, yeah.
Okay. Well, this one's from Sheba, and she said, you were on my show about a month ago. You mentioned a paper that you weren't able to publish, and she wondered if that paper was available to the public.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. That's the one I showed a brief slide of there, that they wouldn't publish it, but was published in EC Nutrition. Let me see if I can pull that up here. Oh, how can I do that? I'm going to go back and share the screen again, if you will.
Sure.
See if I can get something different on here. Oh gosh, where is it? Okay, I'll get there. Maybe.
There it is. Oh,
Oh, here. No, there you go. Oh, here we go. Down there. Below. I got here some place. Where is it? Oh, here it is. There it is right there. I wrote this title, A Nutritional Link for COVID-19, hoping that this is an opportunity for, those of us in medicine, research, policy, to tell the world that, there's some data out there, how to take care of coronavirus. And they wouldn't even review it. We did not, I know this is very controversial, but neither Karen or I took the vaccine because I didn't, I thought some more problems than solutions. We took a lot of heat for that, to say the least. Understandably, people are concerned for us, but after, it was last August actually, we got the COVID, but we didn't get the headaches, we didn't get the fever, we didn't get any of that stuff. And I've had a little bit of a long COVID for having gotten a disease, but I'm here just living with it a little bit. But other than that, we came through fine. I think the whole coronavirus affair, the pandemic, we've got a lot to learn, on what we just went through for the last 3 years. Okay.
Thank you. And she also said that in your book, The Future of Nutrition, you stated that a whole food plant-based eating pattern may reduce susceptibility and improve antibody response to viral illnesses such as COVID-19, and that the antibody immune response may improve within days. Do you think that the opposite is also true, that a person who normally eats a whole food plant-based diet could become susceptible to viral illnesses with days of suddenly eating processed food?
That's a good question. I don't think so, AJ. I know the data. I have lots of other data that viral diseases don't flourish very well among people who really eat well. They don't. We actually had that experience ourselves. It doesn't mean to say we won't get the disease. In fact, we tested positive ourselves, but we didn't suffer the consequences. You test positive a lot of times for flu and stuff like that. You're asking if I think whether or not if we ate processed foods, whether we might then be susceptible to the virus. I can't say that. It's a good question, by the way. Processed foods, that's a tricky term because most people think of processed foods as, got special chemicals in them and maybe contaminated pesticides and herbicides. That's part of the definition. But we can also say processed foods are those things that we cut up. That's not processed, of course. We cook them. That's not very processed. And so we have to use that word processed a little bit carefully. I know that it generally means the foods that are not whole and loaded up with sugar, fat, added oil, added fat, and salt. 3 things we don't need. people can go all the way to a vegan diet, if you will. And it turns out that the amount of fat that vegan, there's a beautiful study, the largest one done, that vegans consume the same amount of fat and sugar as do meat eaters and vegetarians. So I kind of strayed away from the vegan. I know it's not good motivation. I understand it. I appreciate it. All for it. But as far as the science is concerned, that's not in my bailiwick.
Thank you. One of the live viewers is asking, what are your thoughts if you are 90% whole food plant-based? What do you think the impact would be versus somebody that was 100%?
Well, yeah, I'm speaking, and just a judgment call isn't here, opinion, because we haven't really done that. But there's some indirect data shows that people who do 100 are better than ones doing 90. But who knows? I mean, we're all different individuals, and there's sometimes always exceptions. We're playing with odds here. We're playing with the odds, and one of the reasons for doing, going 100%. Is not just because, we're being purists or trying to be strict about it. Not from a scientific point of view at all. One reason to try to go the whole way is this. And this is, I've had friends in Italy who actually did this beautiful sort of thing that they did. They took a bunch of people and put them on a so-called jumpstart diet.
I'm glad you're listening. Okay, bye.
Okay. Hansi, shh.
What's that? Hello?
Hans is talking on the phone. We can hear you. We can hear you.
So anyhow, they took a bunch of people and took them through 9 days, put them on a whole food plant-based diet. And these are people who had health problems, and we saw the usual things. They saw the usual things, feeling good and all that sort of stuff. And at the end of 9 days, unfortunately, only 10% of them stayed with it. Only 10%. And that's pretty routine for those people who try this kind of thing. People can experience this good effect, and then it goes away. They don't stay with it. I mean, some do, of course. But what they did it again. And after 9 days, they asked them, would you like to do this for another 15 days? And so they did. They said, yeah, because it's feeling pretty good. Why not? So they did another 15 days. They did that 4 times. And finally, people had been on, 100% diet that way, up to 60 some days. And then everyone stayed with the diet.
Mm-hmm.
Demonstrating a really important point. And the point is this, our bodies, we get addicted, let's face it, to various tastes. We all do, to this, that, something else. But if we give our body a chance enough to experience what really is good food, at the same time getting health benefits, if we give a chance to stay there, then our taste preferences have changed. And we don't go back. We don't go back. I mean, my wife and I did this kind of slowly over a period of 10 years, I guess you could say, as I was learning this stuff. But, and I still like my cheese, and I did this and that and stuff, and still use dairy. But finally, when we got all the way off, and I really became convinced of this, we stayed there. I have no interest in going back and eating the food that I once did as a kid. Certainly no milk, not even any cheese, which was one of my favorites. No meat. And so that's the way it worked for me. And I think there's a good biological explanation for it.
Thank you.
Get used to it.
Dr. Campbell, Rick and Teresa would like to know, what's your opinion of B12 supplements?
Oh, I sort of go along just without causing a lot of problems. To be honest about it, that's the only thing that I take one once a week, just because Karen said I should. And I have enough problems, so I take them. But really looking at the B12 evidence, I'm not very impressed with the justification for taking that. But there is some evidence that you can get pretty low on that. And there's a few cases here and there that there have been anemia, especially a certain kind of anemia. So I guess I tell anybody else, I said, yeah, do it. Nothing lost because B12 is pretty safe anyhow.
Great. And what are your thoughts on oil, salt, and sugar if one is whole food plant-based? But how can you be whole food plant-based if you're eating oil and sugar because they're not whole foods?
Well, I would say, AJ, it's added oil, added sugar. And we don't usually use those words, but that's what it's about. That's what we should be careful of. You know, I know S and I, actually my good friend, we had some difference of opinion on that one because he's treating heart disease patients. But and added oil is a problem, and the reason it's a problem is because it is plant-based. Most of it, it's corn oil, stuff like that. That's made up of polyunsaturated oils or fats. Those kind of oils are being consumed out of a bottle, out of the context of the whole food. Under that circumstance, just these polyunsaturates, they're susceptible to excessive oxidation, forming free radicals, which in turn on cancer, stimulate heart disease, and so forth. So I'm like my friend and you, AJ, and probably you, Dr. Teal too, that let's not use that added oil. It becomes addictive. It becomes addictive. And so the best thing is stay away from it.
Thank you. There's a question from MT on aflatoxins. Is the aflatoxin that you noted in the study given with the proteins in our food system and or was it prior?
No, the aflatoxin is a mold toxin, by the way. It's a mold called Aspergillus flavus. So it's generally found in peanuts and some peanuts. And also more in corn than what we had realized. And so years ago, when I was first starting my career, in fact, that's what I did my research on. It's a very potent carcinogen when tested alone, like that. But then I got involved with the FDA some because they wanted to. I was working with them at the time too, and they did a good job of bringing the control of bringing aflatoxin contamination under control, especially peanuts. But on a peanut equation, if anybody's eating peanuts or shell under peanuts themselves, you know, you're going to find every once in a while a peanut got some black stuff in it, throw it away, because that's just the occasional peanut that really gets contaminated.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I took a flight this weekend on Southwest, and the airlines don't serve peanuts anymore.
Yeah, probably because of this story I was just telling you. I know.
Yeah.
It's funny. Sometimes these stories they become a little louder and more common, but it's a safe thing. It's fair enough.
Yeah. One of the live viewers apparently has colon cancer. They've been doing whole food plant-based for 3 years, the Mastering Diabetes program. Any advice for somebody that's been eating this way a while and still has cancer or develops cancer?
Yeah, sure. That's also an excellent question. And I have to say that something about science. We'll see something that really is pretty strong. 90% of people affected, maybe 99%, and that's all at play. It doesn't mean somehow that a person doing it all the right way will have a problem. That's for sure. And we don't really know why. And under those circumstances, we have to take some measures, that we otherwise might not. Yeah, we still got work to do, but. And we've got to acknowledge that life is not perfect. It's not perfect, and unfortunately, and we just do the best we can. And if we do it the really right way, the odds of getting the right answer is maybe 90%, maybe it's 99%, like that. So it's science is in some sense a play of chance. That's how we analyze data.
Great, thank you. So you have a new book coming out, don't you, pretty soon, or you're writing one?
Yeah, I do. I am.
Can you talk about it, or is it a secret?
No, it's no secret, but I don't want to tell the content of it because it's going to be a little bit controversial.
Uh-oh.
Basically, I just simple question. Why has it taken so long to understand this concept of nutrition? Now, I have my own experiences being in the professions that I have been, all the way, particularly involved in national policy and other things like that. I have seen what goes on behind the scenes, behind the curtain. I don't like it. I find it extremely upsetting. So I'm basically going to tell what I learned. And at this point, I have nothing to lose. I have a choice. And I'm going to name, I can't help it, because if I didn't name some people, then it would go unnoticed. And some people would say I'm making it up, or if you will, but it's all documented. And then some of the things that have happened, the public, the public doesn't tend to, the public sort of is skeptical about governmental action. I know that. A lot of people are. And they make honest mistakes, and they be cautious. And so I don't want, it's not all black and white. But on the other hand, there are individuals who have something else in mind, and they get in powerful positions. And I've seen it firsthand. I've been there. And so it'll be kind of an interesting story, I suspect. But I really debated, should I tell this stuff? Well, I can't, I can't walk away from something I'm really confident of. I just can't. And so whatever cost, whatever price I pay, don't care. I just want other people to know this is what happens, because these things collectively all trace to a common origin. And we participate in that common flaw without knowing it, because our thinking is largely controlled.
Do you recommend when people have cancer, they give True North a chance if they're eligible?
Yes, I'm glad you didn't mention that. Alan Goldhammer, we all know him, very good friend of mine. I was the one that actually isolated a compound called dioxin. It was the Agent Orange compound, the most toxic chemical ever discovered. My first was at MIT at the time, and I had a job of isolating from some oil being fed to chickens. It was killing the chickens. My job was to see if I could isolate that chemical, and I did in originally pure form. I didn't have the chemical structure. 2 years later, it was labeled dioxin. So, and then I've suffered from that. Had problems, and so I had a difficulty speaking. After about 25 years, I was losing my speech and other things, and I had myself tested. And lo and behold, it was Canadian authorities did this. I had a dioxin level in my blood 800 times the maximum allowed. It was unreal. I couldn't quite believe it. So then I was invited to give a talk by the National Hygiene Society at that time. And I had given up lectures. I couldn't form my words very well. I explained to the fellow who called me, I said, I don't think I can talk. And they said, well, if you come here, there's a lot of doctors of a different kind. The National Hygiene Society national meetings. So they very kindly had me come down, and they were aware of that. And I struggled through it. And then 10 of them, there were about 500 of them, were DCs and DOs and so forth, some MDs. They took me upstairs and examined me, and one thing led to another, and Alan Goldhammer was there. And so at their expense, they sent me out to this fasting place. I thought to myself, I'd been at all kinds of doctors at that point in time. I was kind of depressed about the whole thing. And so I went there, did this worldly fast, because at least I'd maybe get it out of my body. I was tested, it was so high. And so I did it for 14.
You fasted for 14 days.
I did it for 14 days. I came home. It felt okay, but I saw others there with benefits. And then, and I didn't. My problem didn't go away really, to be honest about it. And then I learned that dioxin at that time, this many years later, was proven to be a neurotoxin. So all of a sudden, I sort of had, I thought, an explanation for it. But then Alan told me, come back again. He said, sometimes you got to do it twice. So I did. And so I came back and did it with this time with Karen, because that's when she got diagnosed with melanoma, by the way. And so I thought that was a good measure for that too. So we both went there. I came home the second time, and it was within about 3 weeks, 4 weeks. My problem was resolved. And then I got tested at UCLA in the lab there, the toxicology lab. It was down to 0.
Yeah.
So I am a fan of fasting, I can tell you. I was just there again for a while, about 14 days, I guess it was. And there are a lot of people there now doing it for 40 days, water only fasting. So I'm a big fan of, as a matter of fact, next week, for any of you who might wish to know this, the National Hygiene Society now named the National Health Association. Alan is one of the premier members. Frank Sabatino is another, run by Mark Cuban. They come out with quarterlies. They just came out in a magazine and featured an interview with me, and then asked me to come out and give the keynote. So this is 1 week from today, next Friday. No, 1 week from tomorrow in Cleveland, Ohio.
That's fantastic. Dr. Campbell, this most recent trip to True North, did you go just like to visit, or did you actually fast again?
No, I fasted. And the reason I did is because my daughter went with me. She had some problem was bothering her. And so we thought that's my go-to solution.
That's so great. I wish we could all take you with us when we go to fast, Dr. Campbell.
Well, Alan, I just like being with Alan too. We were very good friends, and so I did it. And I said I did have a bit of a problem. My blood pressure had gotten up above what it should be, and I didn't know what. I think it was stress from all the stuff that I'm talking about in the book, I guess. But it was fluctuated. It'd go up and then go down, and so that's why I went there. Yeah.
That's great. Dr. Campbell, thank you. I know it's so late where you are. We thank you so much for your life's work and for doing this, especially so late. We really appreciate you, and we can't wait for your next book.
Well, all I can say, you guys, you've been at this a long time yourself, was cooking and Hans, what you've been doing with your organization and your people. All I can say, keep it up. We're all on the right track, and it's kind of fun to see something happen that's good. So the two of you are doing something that's happening, and it's good. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Dr. Jill, would you like to come back on for a moment and just say goodbye to the people, or would Betty like to talk about your organization?
Dr. Campbell, you're looking great. I won't tell them what your age is, but you are advancing chronologically, but you're not biologically advancing. You're staying right where you are. You're looking young, and I'm really happy that all of us would be today with Chef AJ and the Healthy Road program. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. And Betty, did you want to talk about the Zoom that your organization does, if people want to find out more about what you do?
Sure, yes. Thank you, thank you, Chef AJ, and thank you, Dr. Campbell. My name is Betty Peoples Wheeler, and I and my colleague, we run a group called Healthy Road Lifestyle. It's a group that emphasizes the importance of a whole food, plant-based diet. I will give you my number. It's 909-228-0217. I'll put it in the chat. If you're interested, it's a great group of people. We support each other as we are working on our health goals. So it's a great place to come with a lot of wonderful people. And Dr. Deal has been a great support to our group. And so we thank you all again for being here tonight. What a great meeting it has been. And we thank you so much, Dr. Campbell, for all of your contributions to science. I loved what you've done over the years and just feel honored that you've joined us today. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks all of you, and everyone have a good evening. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. You can all wave goodbye. Take care. Good night. Oh, it's so sad to see you go. Bye, everybody.